Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, the session will be recorded, and everyone is in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions pane, and then we'll address any questions at the end of the webinar. I'm Hella Schwartz-Grossman, Marketing Manager at Worldox, and today's session is a conversation about deployment options. Did you know Worldox can be deployed to fit the needs of your firm? While working solely in the office may have been fine at one time, things have changed. Your staff may need to work remotely. And today we'll provide you with insights on the benefits of each deployment model to your firm's business strategy. Joining me today are Frank Jones and Sandy Johnson of Legal Software Connection, Charlotte Quiroz and Van Swearingen of Cadence Solutions, Peter Brannigan of DoxAdvisors, Rick Bernauer of Cytek, John Heckman of Heckman Consulting, and we also have Rebecca Satin, CIO of Worldox. And at this point, Rebecca, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Hella. So before we get into the details of the deployment options, I just want to cover, this is kind of one of my favorite topics, and it's an important piece of the puzzle when you're trying to determine which deployment model might be right for you. Basically, is the equipment that's used by your firm owned by the firm, or do you have a bring your own device policy? If the firm owns all the equipment like laptops and mobile devices, then our cloud, enterprise, or web products might be a good fit. When you use cloud, enterprise, or web, basically documents are downloaded to the local device when they're opened and edited. So if the firm doesn't own the devices used to access the system, this means that firm work product or client data might be downloaded to a personal device outside of the control of the firm. If you have a BYOD policy and you're interested in a cloud solution or just a remote access solution, you might consider going with a hosted desktop, which we're going to cover today as well, or any other type of containerized solution where all the data and the applications remain within the hosted system. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to John Heckman, who's going to talk about the different, give you an overview of the different deployment options.
Good afternoon, everybody. Basically, there are 4 or 5 different ways to implement Worldox. The traditional way is on-premises. That means that all your data is on your own servers. Your firm controls the hardware and data. It's what people have had in the past, but as everybody knows, things are changing. The on-premises still remains the least expensive, even if you figure in your IT and server costs and so forth. And it will also give you the fastest response time by far of other solutions that go over the web. A lot of people use remote into their own work, desktop at work, in conjunction with a solution. A hosted solution basically takes your on-premise server and puts it in the cloud. You've got the same server that you connect to, but it's in the cloud. It's the same licensing as professional, so your costs are the same. There's a wide variety of hosting companies and options, from Amazon to ISP providers that have their own server farms and so forth. One of the things that a Worldox consultant can do is make sure that you have adequate provisioning for the cloud, because a lot of times cloud expenses in terms of storage and memory and so forth are more expensive than what it is on premises. So providers try and give you what Microsoft says is the minimum requirement, which is never adequate. So one of the things that the Worldox consultant can do is help you make sure you've got adequate provisioning for your system. Okay, next slide. Okay. Enterprise was originally developed for firms that have a main central office and then anywhere from 2 or 3 to a dozen or more outlying offices. And basically, it's a combination of professional and cloud. I won't go into the technical details, but your main server is in your main office, and all the outlying offices connect through a proprietary remote desktop server into your main server. The fourth solution that's become very popular is the Worldox Cloud. In the Worldox Cloud, the functionality is virtually identical to professional, including the screens and so forth. Somebody said when we were discussing this that the only difference is the 4 little green connection bars that you see at the top, which is what I've stuck up there. It's important to note that the Worldox Cloud integrates automatically with Office, Acrobat, various other products that you use. So unlike some other unnamed products, the integration is automatic. You don't have to save and then upload. It's a one-step process. You also have controlled access with a stub client. The stub client is on your laptop or desktop. This also refers to what Rebecca was talking about. Whose laptop is it? Is it owned by the firm, or is it a personal, private laptop? And the last point on this is Worldox hosts the data. So Worldox controls the data. It's not by some third-party ISP or whatever. Okay, last slide. On top of any of these is Worldox Web. Worldox Web has gotten better and better. There's been a couple of main upgrades recently. It can be added to any of the above options. So you can have it in addition to cloud or addition to professional. And what it does is it gives you browser access to Worldox. I didn't put it on the slide, but there's also an iPad access option with Worldox Web. The web agent also provides automatic integration with Office, Acrobat, and so forth, so that when you go and save a document in Word, the Worldox Web opens up the cloud, opens up Worldox in the cloud, and saves the document directly to Worldox. Again, it's a one-step process. It's important to notice that the firm controls the rights and access to Worldox Web. So if you've got how many ever users, but you only want 10 of them or whatever to have access to Worldox Web, you can do that. You can configure that in Worldox. Worldox Web is usually, or maybe I should say should be, implemented with two-factor authentication, either through an application app or with a message second code. And I mentioned already that it also integrates with iOS and the iPad client. So for people that are using Macs, this is an option for them to work with Worldox. That's it. That's the everybody.
Thanks, John.
Other people are going to talk about the details. So this is just basically your basic options, and then other people are going to go into the nitty-gritty of each one of these options.
Thanks, John. And I think, Frank, you were going to speak a little bit about our cloud.
Yes, hello, thank you. So Rebecca, I'd like to kind of go back and forth with you and anybody else on some of these things. Number one, I would say that if you know Worldox GX4 Professional, you already know Worldox Cloud. Other than a couple of mechanical differences, such as files being automatically checked out as they're downloaded to your device, if you know Pro, you know Cloud. Item number two is the system is professionally managed by people at World Software. There's a dedicated team of people there that handle this. Part of that includes handling backups, And Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe there's not only the backup that they're managing, there's a secondary location that those are also backed up to a secondary site just in case something happened to the primary site.
That is correct.
Number 3, you still have your Worldox reseller. If your reseller is a cloud reseller, like all of us are, then we will continue to follow you to the cloud. We'll provide all the professional services, the initial orientation, any ongoing training. Tech support calls can be handled either direct with the cloud team or through your professional reseller, one of us. So we're still there. You're not left behind at all. The only real difference will be, I think John alluded to it, is that your data lives in the Worldox Cloud data center. It is an incredible place. I won't mention where it is unless Rebecca wants to say that, but suffice it to say, it is in a place that it's a perfect location. It has unparalleled internet circuits, redundant circuits. The power grid where it is impeccable, and that's super important when you're talking about a cloud solution. Number 4, and this is where I'll need Rebecca to chime in a little bit, but essentially the way I see it, your data is encrypted both at rest when it's living in the cloud data center. I believe it's hardware encryption, but you can comment on that, Rebecca. And then in transit. So as the files are traveling from the cloud data center to your workstation to work on those files, that is also encrypted. What more should you add to that, Rebecca?
That is correct. It is hardware encrypted, or it is hardware encryption based on the storage device upon which the data resides. And the encryption in transit is a combination of our proprietary Worldox encryption and also just the RDS protocol encryption as well.
Next slide. And there's a cute little icon. Stay on that slide, Rebecca. So John shared one little picture of something that looks like a connection. And there's what WD-SAS, that's that client that John alluded to, what he called the stub client. That is a Windows client installed on your computers. And we call it WD-SAS for Worldox Software as a Service. Next screen, please.
I might be getting a little ahead, and my apologies if I am, but Frank, one of the things, since you pointed out the WD-SAS client, one of the things that I always like about our cloud product that differentiates us from some of the others, if you can access something from any browser, then you're back to that problem where company data might end up downloaded onto any device. Whereas with Worldox Cloud, you have control over where people are going to download and utilize their Worldox documents based on where that client is installed. So if you want to make sure that those documents are only accessed from a firm device, Worldox Cloud can do that because that cloud client will only be installed on the devices where you want it.
You've just absolutely nailed number 6 on that screen.
Sorry.
So thank you for that. No, I was going to say, please talk about that. That's right. So you're in total control of where the who's able to run Worldox, and I think that's ideal. Number 5, hybrid model. I'll try to explain what I think about this, and I'll explain this from how my customers tell me. And I'll just pick on attorneys for a second. I often hear from attorneys that if they have access to their documents, which as far as Worldox is concerned, that's not just Word, it's Excel, it's PDF, it's PowerPoint, it's Visio, it's any kind of electronic file. But these attorneys tell me all the time, if they have access to their documents and to their email, they're good to go. In other words, they may not need all the other suite of applications that others in the firm are using, from case management, maybe not even the billing system directly, because they may be able to enter time on their smartphone, etc. So in other words, a hybrid model means that the Worldox portion, which is so important to these attorneys, is hosted in Worldox Cloud. And frankly, that's what most of them, all they need. It's therefore highly secure, it's highly available. And that's what I mean by hybrid. What other folks today are going to talk about aren't hybrid, they're much more entirely hosted scenarios in one or more different fashions. Number 7, Worldox is incredibly low cost to transition to the cloud. Absolutely fact. Compared to anybody else's cloud, Worldox makes it easy, and it's incredibly low cost. You don't have to really convert anything. So your reseller, cloud reseller, and World Software will help you do that at a very low cost. Number 8, once you're in the cloud, your costs become very predictable, and you can budget them. You'll know what your monthly costs are for these solutions. You won't have to worry anymore about a server that houses your documents, an indexer that indexes your data. That will all be taken over by World Software as part of your monthly subscription cost. So your file server could go away. Maybe, maybe not, depending what other apps you have in the office. Your indexer will definitely go away. I think that's it for number 8, unless you want to add anything to that, Rebecca.
I think that's it. Although, well, so we have had firms where, like, even prior to the pandemic, we've had some firms as Worldox customers who the firm is totally virtual, and they calculated essentially a per seat cost for adding a new person to the company based on their licensing for Worldox and all of their other products. So again, back to your predictable costs, it becomes very predictable, even if you're talking about adding people to your firm or, losing people.
So as you can tell by my passion for that number 8, I'm a big believer in Worldox Cloud. And the final screen, just to show what John Heckman already showed, there is that little connections, a little rectangle up on the top left below the home button. That's simply showing the end user that in Worldox Cloud, that is their connection. That was a really good one. It was like 5 bars. That came from my computer, so that means I'm doing well. And the only other thing you'll notice at the very top of the screen in the title bar of that Worldox desktop, it says GX in the cloud. Other than the fact it says that in the title bar and you have the connection indicator, if you know Pro, you know Cloud. And I think that's it for me, unless other folks on this would like to add something to what I've covered.
I think you covered. Oh, the one thing I could add is that we've mentioned Worldox Web, and we're going to come back to Worldox Web in a minute, but Worldox Web comes with Cloud. So if you have Cloud licenses, you can also turn on Worldox Web for anybody you'd like, which includes the iOS app. So if you've got people who like to access Worldox from an iOS device, that would come free with their Cloud subscription.
Thank you. Thank you, Hella.
All right. So I think next up we have Peter and Van to talk about different hosted desktop options.
Okay. And I'll go ahead and start here, and then Peter can talk some as well. Okay, so traditionally when we would be working on a desktop from outside the office, we'd be working on a terminal server or a Citrix desktop. This is with a shared operating system where multiple users are logging in. Now this option worked, and it worked really well, and some of our customers are going to continue using this remote access technology. However, we want to talk a little bit today about hosted desktop options where you can have Worldox Professional, where everyone has their own operating system desktop, and what improvements in performance you can expect from that. So you have better performance, better security, and better reliability with a hosted desktop model. Baker Cadence, my company, and DoxAdvisors, we and the rest of us all have a number of customers who've migrated to these hosted desktop platforms, some of them in Microsoft Azure, some Amazon Web Services, and some of the IT companies that we've worked with have, again, like John was saying, their own server farms, iWorks and BMC and so forth, among others. So what a hosted desktop provides is that your personnel can access their workstation anywhere, okay, and have a consistent experience across all their different devices. You don't really need to be concerned, are they accessing this desktop from a personal computer or from a Mac, because they'll have the same experience with that remote hosted desktop. Okay, so you're not going to experience any performance or feature compromises with hosted desktop, because you're going to have performance identical to your on-premises deployment with Worldox Professional. And again, users can easily move from one device to another because they will access the hosted desktop, and then, oh, I want to go to a different computer. I can just disconnect my connection from that hosted desktop, go home, and log into my computer at home, and reconnect to the same desktop right where I left off with all the documents I had ready and whatever screens I had displayed. Okay, so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And Peter, please go ahead.
Sure. So and we had talked about in preparation of this that we could either talk in general about the concepts, or we could reference certain products or vendors that we've worked with that are successful. Because one of the advantages of using a VAR, like any of us, are not only do we have dozens and hundreds of customers ourselves, but we also share our notes on which ones work and which ones don't work. And the hosted desktop is not a universal experience. There are some companies do it well. There's some companies that skimp on stuff, others that limit access. There's so different pros and cons. But personally, the one that we've migrated a number of clients to recently is this box top that we've done from Tavish Group. And this is really desktop as a service. You know, we had an evolution of software as a service, and then we had sort of infrastructure as a service. And it's really evolving now into this desktop as a service with all the things that Van just mentioned. And one of the great things is that no personnel retraining is needed of any kind, because this desktop is identical to what they had. So when we go live with a client, they go home on a Friday, they had a desktop in their cube or wherever they had it. And when they come back on Monday, they've got a choice. They can either have a little device for peripherals like scanners, printers, that's an option. Or if they don't need those locally, they can just have a web browser where you get a full screen, and literally you would not know that this is a remote desktop in the cloud versus a physical machine sitting beside you. There's literally no difference, which means there is no retraining. Unlike some things where you change the environment, logging onto a VPN, getting connected to RDP, multiple steps. This is very simple. You hit a button on this little device, or you hit a logon page, you put in a username, password, and Windows, and you're done. Basically, you're completely in this environment. One advantage of going, Frank talked about moving from on-site to the cloud and the saving of costs and the transition. Likewise, in this environment, there's other cost savings, which are you keep your professional licenses, because we actually do an on-premise installation in the cloud. So even the few differences you saw before, they don't exist. There's no 4 bars. There's no difference whatsoever in the interface. It is a GX4 client that runs. It's not the WD SaaS client. It's the full client. And just as an example of that, as some people sort of find out when they go to the cloud, sometimes if they drag and drop a file to the desktop on the on-premise, you can't really do that in the cloud because you can't pull it off a virtual directory in the cloud. So you can lose that functionality, and it's not a big deal because there's other ways to do that, but it's just natural habits for people. But in this desktop as a service environment, you literally can drag the file onto your desktop now because everything is co-located, it's in the same environment and sharing the same memory space. So there's literally no compromise whatsoever. And again, you're keeping the same professional licenses, so you don't have to pay the monthly fee, because if you bought your license originally for lifetime, that's preserved and you keep using that lifetime license. Now, one other thing, and I think Rebecca mentioned it, about your devices, whether company devices or personal devices. Again, in this kind of environment, that's now irrelevant, because if you have a home device or a personal laptop when somebody's working remotely these days, as many people are, once you connect that to VPN, you're now kind of exposing whatever's on that desktop to your network. You've opened a link into your network, and you've got a machine that's connected to that you're not controlling, and there's some risk there. With the DAS solution, that's irrelevant because what you're connecting to is already enclosed in a container, as Rebecca referred to, a closed container. So whether you're in on an internet cafe or on your home device or a company device or your personal phone is now irrelevant because the whole system is closed and it's all kind of local. So all your compliance that you might have, your HIPAA compliance, is all intact, no matter what device people use. That's a pretty powerful concept. And as we said before, user peripherals are supported. So we did a webinar a few days ago with a client, a Worldox client that's using this solution, moved over to it 2 years ago. And basically, that attorney talked about how he can print to his admin's computer or her printer, or he can print when he's this is when he's at home. He can print to her printer, he can print to his office printer, or he can print to his home printer beside him. So you don't lose any peripherals of scanners by the fact that you're going in the cloud. Traditionally, sometimes it was hard to connect those devices if you're using an RDP or a terminal server kind of environment. It kind of worked, but it's not seamless. This way, it's seamless. And Van already talked eloquently about how to switch devices. So it goes beyond just your home and your office, though, because you can actually switch from your office computer to your iPhone or your iPad, all with a document open at a certain place. And across all those devices, it's the exact same experience. So we would see this as kind of and also, by the way, it's actually as faster than any on-premise that we've ever seen, because again, these machines are all co-located beside the data, and it is extremely fast. So it's literally some of the fastest interactions we've seen. And you can put all your custom software, whatever you want. You can install QuickBooks if you need QuickBooks or whatever particular things you need. There's no limitations. You don't have to wait for it to be published from a central place if you've got authority to install software. So that's the DAS, desktop as a service, and it's not for everybody because there's an infrastructure change. But if you're in line for that kind of a change to your environment, there's no question this is the one I would choose if I had the money to do it.
Actually, I think any of your firms that you've worked with that made this change prior to March 2020 were probably able to transition to the new world very easily.
And that's correct. And that's what that attorney said the other day as well. He said when they went live, first of all, it was complete, there's no transition time at all. Even going live was a weekend. And when COVID hit, they literally, they historically had nobody working from home. Everybody was in the office. And once COVID hit, they practically had zero downtime. There was one product that took them 4 or 5 hours to get working remotely for people. And literally that was the only impact to their whole transition to everybody on-site, off-site. So there's no more working from home, working from the office. There's just working. There's no geographical aspect to it anymore. It's just working.
Did that firm have any issues with people not having equipment at home?
No, not really, because again, all you need is a browser. So everybody's got a browser of some sort, right? So just any
not
browser.
Necessarily.
Well, I know, but yeah, but generally the people, would have that at home, and of course the company could provide a device for the people, whatever it might be. But most people in the Northeast, anyway, would probably have access. But they didn't have any problem with that.
I think there is an issue here, which is internet connectivity, which sort of nobody talks about. But all of this depends on your internet connection. And if you're going through a mobile hotspot, you're not going to have the response time. Or if for some reason you're having problems with your internet provider and your service is way down, you're not going to have the response time. So, basically internet has been getting better and better, and people are mostly in cities. So it's becoming less and less of a problem. But in my view, it's still there in the background, and it can come and knock you over the head at very nasty times.
No, that's definitely a consideration. The only thing I would say, though, is that when you have a DAS environment, there's nothing coming down except the screen, the pixels of the screen, all the processing. So there's no, like when the cloud, you download the file to work on locally. In a DAS environment, there's nothing moving over the internet. It stays in the hosted area. So you're just getting the screen, the picture that's coming down and the pixels, which is very low bandwidth, but it is definitely something that people, you have to focus on people having a decent internet and maybe subsidize that for people to get them the proper internet connection. But even on the phone, even over a hotspot, I've used this over a hotspot, to be quite honest, that there's so little data passing back and forth that it's not the traditional, downloading a large PDF with response times. That doesn't exist.
Well, can I add into that, guys? Because I fully agree with both John and Peter. And Peter, I share your enthusiasm. I do, and I do for that particular provider also. But here's my point. All clouds are not equal. And that's a huge point. All clouds are not equal. And I would highly encourage anybody who has a trusted consulting company like one of us, that's a conversation that needs to be had. Not only do we know what questions to ask and what might be the right model of all these different models we're talking about, but all clouds are not equal. So whose cloud you select is a huge differentiator. The Worldox Cloud that I referred to earlier, when I said their internet backbone was unbelievable, that kind of gets in line with John Heckman in the sense of that's half the equation. So the pipes coming from there are extremely redundant and very high speed, but you're still left with what you have on your side. So I would just encourage everyone to talk to us. We know the products, we know the industry, and we'll help you figure out what the right way to go. And if you really don't want to do any of these models, I would also suggest that almost everybody should be implementing Worldox Web. So regardless of what you're doing, that is an add-on that has reached prime time and is ready to go.
Thanks, Frank.
Yes. Let me also point out that the webinar series that have been hosted here, if you are visiting worldox.com/webinars, you'll see there are a number of these hosting providers have participated in the webinar, so you'll want to have a look and see what their suggestions are, what their experiences are through the webinar series, as well as talking to your reseller.
That's a good point, Van, because in those webinars, Frank's point about not all clouds are equal, they each do have their different strengths, and even though they all might be doing some sort of a hosted situation, they all do it in a slightly different way. So watching those webinars will give people a better idea of what each of those providers has to offer.
That's right. And if you see a very big difference in price between different quotes you're getting, let that be something to ponder. Why is that? So when Peter Brannigan just said that if you had the money, he'd do this, that's because the way they do this is such a stellar high-end way that it's worth every cent, and it's competitive price to something else that may not be the better cloud. They're not the same price. You get what you pay for in this one.
Okay, so Worldox Enterprise, John Heckman spoke about it a little bit at the beginning, but it's basically a great solution for firms who want to centralize their data, and they either have multiple offices or they have many people working remotely. It's also a good solution for those situations where the firm owns the equipment that people will use to access it. It's the same technology that we use with Worldox Cloud, but it's in the firm's own data center, which could include Azure or AWS if that's the route that the firm is taking. Using Enterprise instead of Cloud will give firms more control over the location of their data, though. For example, if they wanted to put it in Azure or AWS, or even still have it in their own data center, and put their own rules in place about how that data can be accessed. Does anybody have anything to add about Worldox Enterprise?
This is Rick Bernauer. I work with a lot of firms on Worldox Enterprise. I find it a very good solution. It's often more of that enterprise, larger site, but the fact that it maintains control of where the documents are located, so that's totally under the firm's control. They also have total control over other back-end features like ethical walls and adding users. It makes the investment in it really worthwhile. So if you have a mid-sized type firm, I would really suggest looking at enterprise and comparing it to what the cloud features are or the desktop as a service, and see if it might meet your needs, because it's been proven technology that makes it very easy to be able to get to stuff. It is like cloud, but you're in total control.
Thanks, Rick. Actually, you reminded me of another thing that I'm not sure that has come up yet, but if you're looking at what choice to make in these deployment options, you also have to look at, well, I think maybe Frank brought this up a little bit, but depending on what applications you use every day, again, if Worldox is the only application that you use that has to be installed locally or whatever, then cloud or enterprise is great. But if you have something like a Tabs or Practice Master or any of those other products that also have to have a locally installed client, that's another reason why you might go towards one of those hosted solutions instead of this, because you can actually bring all of those applications. And I think Peter mentioned QuickBooks. All of your applications can go inside that environment, whereas enterprise and cloud are solutions that solve the Worldox problem, not necessarily the problem of how do you access your other applications remotely.
And it's back to all clouds are not equal.
Yep.
And a good reference point to that is Clio is a very common small firm billing system, but their cloud doesn't talk to other people's clouds. So Worldox has a solution to that through a third party, but where we're at in the state of the business, the state of the tech industry, is all these different clouds that are out there with all these different products or services don't necessarily all talk to one another. So back to some of these hosted opportunities, that may be the sweet spot, at least for this generation, however many years into the future.
Yep. And actually, Worldox Web is an important piece to this puzzle, because for a lot of these browser-based products, Worldox Web is the conduit through which your Worldox Professional, Enterprise, or Cloud can integrate with some of those other components. Worldox Web, if you have Professional, Enterprise, or Cloud, Worldox Web is free, as long as if you have Professional or Enterprise, Worldox Web is free if you're installing it in your own environment. If you have Worldox Cloud, Worldox Web is free. We also have a hosted Worldox Web option if you're a smaller firm and you don't necessarily want to, even though the product is free, you still have to have a web server upon which to install it. And if you don't want to have proliferation of servers, you can go with our hosted option, and that is $10 per user per month. And all we have to do in that situation is set up a proxy server that can usually go on your indexer, depending on how many users you have and how high the usage is going to be. But ultimately, it's an option for those that don't want to have to spin up that web server themselves. But if you do install it in your own data center, it's a very cost-effective way to provide remote access to the Worldox data. And what I would say, for those considering it, if you have some serious power users, if you have like the legal assistant that knows every single feature of Worldox Pro and uses them every day, that person is probably not going to be happy with Worldox Web right at this moment. But if you have a lawyer who they're searching for documents, they're opening documents, they're editing them, they're saving them, they're closing them and moving on. If they're doing just your basic stuff, those people are going to really like Worldox Web because it allows you to do all of those things. Now, ultimately, our goal as a company is to bring more of the features of Worldox Pro into Worldox Web. And with each new release of Worldox Web, you get more of those features. So as we move forward, there will be more of those Worldox Pro advanced features that make it into Worldox Web. So don't count it out for good if you're a power user. Just maybe it's something that you look at down the line. The other great thing about Worldox Web is that we have security settings within WD admin that make it possible to control who can download data and where. So again, because it's browser-based, if you don't want people just downloading Worldox documents to any computer that they access it from, you can once again control it using the web agent, which is a small client piece. And if you want, you can set it up using some settings in WD admin so that it's possible that people can get to it through any web browser, but they can't actually download anything from the web browser. If they actually want to download something, then they can use the web agent. And the web agent can be controlled in terms of where it's possible to install it. So once again, if you have a situation where you only want documents to be downloaded on firm-owned devices, you have that ability to control that using Worldox Web.
Quick compliment to your development team, Rebecca. What you're showing here on the screen is the new dashboard. So anybody who's got a Worldox Cloud subscription and is using web might have noticed that recently something got improved. They've updated Worldox Web in the cloud. In the field, the customer base will be seeing the update to the latest release of web in the next week or two. It will be auto updating. But yesterday, Sandy and I were looking at a site and we noticed the new dashboard. And frankly, we noticed it's getting closer and closer to being equal to Pro. It's still not quite there, but it's certainly a heck of a lot closer than it was in Web 3 or 3.1. So if you're a firm that looked at it in 3 and played with it and decided it's not time yet, it may be time to reevaluate that.
Thanks, Frank. Actually, so the only feature I can think of off the top of my head that is not yet in Web 3.2 with this release that's going to be coming out in the next week or so is related documents. So that's something that we haven't gotten to yet. So if you're a firm that uses that feature heavily, this might not be something you want to look at yet until we get that feature into it. But there's so many features that are, I mean, I don't know, Frank, can you think of any other features that a power user might use that are not in this new release that's coming?
Sandy and I yesterday were beating it up and we were asking ourselves that. And I think the answer is there's few people that would not be okay with this once we reach this level. It's responsive, it's reliable, it's really cool. And I love the dashboard. It launches to the dashboard when you sign in. You can come back to it if you want. And it's got it laid out with all your recents, as you see here. It's just really cool.
All right, thanks. And that appears to be our last slide.
Okay, all right. We do have a couple of questions if you feel up to just answering some of those. One is a question is desktop as a service the same as a remote desktop? What is the difference?
Well, I'll take that, or Van, you can talk after. But I mean, in a remote desktop, you usually publish apps and you publish certain apps to a set of people. So you kind of have a superset somewhere. And then for each user, you determine, I'll give them A, B, C, and D. I'll give this person A, C, G, and H. So you're kind of coming from a superset, and then each user gets a subset. And the desktop as a service, and as Frank alluded correctly, was all of your infrastructure moves to the cloud. So you have nothing in your office basically. And that it is a desktop just like in your office where any user could suddenly, let's say, have to use some product. QuickBooks was the obvious example for the accounting team. They could just go and install that on that desktop. It doesn't have to become part of a superset and then get locked off from other users and made available only to the accounting team. If the accounting team needs it, you just install it on them. The same with Tabs Practice Master. As you said, most of the clients we've moved over, they have Tabs and Practice Master as well. And it all just seamlessly goes together. But I suppose the main difference is that, you know, that the way you log in is a bit different, it's easier. And the fact that it's not a centralized, controlled, published desktop. You have individual desktops that are controlled in some way, you know, by policy, but not technologically. You can install anything that's valid on that workstation.
Well, to me, Peter, a virtual desktop is what BoxTop is. A virtual desktop is what Amazon Web Services is. A virtual desktop is what Microsoft is now promoting. That type of environment, everybody has their own CPU, their own memory allotment, their own use of disk, etc. In too many of these hosted solutions, it's simply remote desktop in the cloud. And therefore, you're sharing one or many remote desktop servers, and if they're not set up properly and memory allocated properly, etc., etc., you're all beginning to depreciate your own performance because you're sharing it with somebody else. Thus, the difference in the price tag, which is what I alluded to earlier. When you get to the high-end hosting vendors that are probably virtual desktop today, the cost is going to be higher, but the reward is more than worth the difference in those monthly amounts.
And some of those companies. So what I believe BoxTop does is a persistent desktop, meaning that if you put a file on your desktop, the next time you log in, it's going to be there. If you install something on there, then the next time you log in, it's going to be there. Whereas even some of the people that have an individual desktop that's got where you're not sharing resources, some of them still have a very controlled environment to where you can't install anything you want, and you can't, reconfigure things, because ultimately when you log out, that desktop is going to disappear into the vapor, and the next time you log back in, a new one is going to be generated for you. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and again, it's partially what each firm is comfortable with. Which is why we encourage you to look at all of those webinar videos, because each one of these companies does it just slightly differently.
They do, but I don't think they did an adequate job in explaining what we're talking about, in my humble opinion. The investment that somebody like Tabush has to make for BoxTop to be what it is, the same with Amazon, the same with Microsoft, their investment in that is at such a high end. The monetary value of this, they have to charge more for it on a monthly basis. Too many of these other cloud hosting providers, no, they're skimping on the resources to have a lower price. And then you have these customers that say, that's not what I thought it was, it's too slow. If it's too slow for you, there's something really wrong. Albeit what John Heckman said with the internet connection, it shouldn't be that way. If you have anything better than 2 tin cans and a string, you should be able to use these remote systems very efficiently. If they're not, it's on the hosting side. That's why, again, I think you need to talk to one of us if you're contemplating moving from on-premise. We'll help you. We'll talk to you about different vendors that we know and trust, and we'll get into the weeds about all these things. Am I right in that, Peter and Van?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Actually, I think, so like during the pandemic, there are a lot of firms that I've heard of who have, like, they've maybe not wanted to look at any of these different options because they've just sent everybody home and everybody is just using RDP to get into their own workstations. And why a solution like this is just so superior to something like that is, for example, unless you've blocked it by policy, what if somebody by mistake shuts down their PC? Or what if the power goes out in your actual office space? what these companies that do hosting bring to the table, aside from all of these wonderful things that our VARs have mentioned, is the fact that their data centers have redundant power, they've got redundant internet connections, so none of this ever goes down. And even if your power goes out in your house or in your office building, in fact, if your power goes out in your office building and you're using one of these solutions, you can just send everybody home, and as long as they have power on at their home, they can keep working. So that's the other really great benefit to something like this.
Or go to a local hotel, for example. You know, you
Yep.
go to a local hotel with a conference room and whatever, and use their internet access or their business center or whatever it might be if you don't have it at home. Yeah.
Right. Let's see, do we have any more? Yes, somebody asked if they need an installed copy of Office to integrate with Worldox, or does Office 365 work?
Rebecca, why don't you tackle that?
Well, so the question is, do they need a locally installed copy of Worldox, or can they just use the browser-based version? Is that the question?
No, of Office. Yes.
Office.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Did I not say Office? Sorry. So Worldox integrates best with the locally installed Microsoft Office applications. If you're talking about using Office 365 through a browser, ultimately, we have a lot of integrations with Office 365. We toyed at one point with an add-in to the online applications of Office 365. But when we were first coming out with something like that, we only had the Web 2.x product. And when Web 3 came out, we decided to table development of that product until Web 3 was out and was in a good place. So once we get this next update out that is coming out in the next couple of weeks, they will be starting development again on an add-in for the Office 365 online components. I hope that answers the question.
Well, 365, just for one, I was sitting here thinking about this a few weeks ago. To me, Microsoft is brilliant as a marketing company. 365 is a marketing scheme and a deployment model. What I mean by that is they're presenting this to you like there's something special about this. No, the deployment model is that you're going to have local apps delivered from your subscription. It is not likely at this point in time you're going to use their web apps to a high degree because they're not state of the art yet. So the answer to, I believe, the question is, but just don't let me finish. The answer to the question, I think, is that you're going to need these installed on your machines, and they're going to integrate with everything we've talked about. If you're in one of these hosted models, they're installed within that hosted environment, and they are the heavy clients of Microsoft. Back to you, Rebecca.
The special, sorry to interrupt, but the special thing about Office 365 is that Microsoft now gets money from you every single month.
Well, that's why it's a
special thing.
It's a marketing scheme and a deployment model that hasn't really reached the evolution of this magical replacement where everything is web-based stuff. It's just not there yet. And they've confused the heck out of a lot of people.
But by charging you every month, they are also providing you with updates pretty much constantly. There are constant updates to the Office suite that are coming down in terms of improvements and changes. And oops, they moved that thing that used to be over there over to here. And yeah,
right. That's a whole other webinar, isn't it? Because one would say that's great. And if you're doing what we do for a living, which is support, it doesn't feel that great a lot of the time because things are changing. Then they're rolled back 4 hours later. Then they're back 2 weeks later. And, you know, that's the great Microsoft. We're now the testers for Microsoft. Every one of us. Every end user is now the tester of Microsoft.
That's a good point. Let me see. I don't think we have any more specific questions, I don't know if anybody else has anything they would like to add to what we've talked about so far. Any last comments before we end for today? No? Okay. All right. Then I think we will say goodbye for today. I'm thank everyone for attending and participating. We are going to send a recording out to everyone, and we'll also post it on our website. We have a page with all the past webinars we've done, and so feel free to take a look. And thanks again for everyone, and we hope you'll join us again next time we have a webinar, usually on Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. We are very excited. We have Ari Kaplan joining us at the end of the month on October 29th. And well, we hope we'll see you then. So thank you all, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.